Welcome to the 43rd Mill Valley Film Festival. We're so happy to have you here at our drive-in this evening for the premiere of the Evening Hour. With us today is the director, Braden King, and the star of the film, Philip Ettinger, who plays Cole Freeman. Thank you for being with us today.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I saw a wonderful quote, which I think is a prologue to the next question I want to ask you. The quote is from, I believe, one of your associate producers and also an author from that area. He says, "The air that breathes life into Braden's film is mountain air, the air inhaled and exhaled by mountain people. And we are happy to share that breath with him and his crew." I thought that was a lovely quote, and I think it represents a feeling that you have for this film about the connection with the people. It's an obvious question, but I think it's really relevant to hear. What was it that made you, upon reading the novel that this film came from, want to shoot this film and be involved in this community?
I think looking back through, all the work I've done as a filmmaker over the last 20 plus years, that one of the core draws for me has always been landscape, geography, and sort of how we find our place in the world. And in a nutshell, Carter Sickels' book, on which the film is based, sort of contained all of those things in spades. I mean, from very early on in the book, it was very clear that this was set in a incredibly vivid, fully formed world that I was intensely curious about, and within a landscape that was at the time not extremely well known to me, but that I was really interested in exploring. And I think that the combination of the kind of dramatic engine that was under the hood and the experiential aspects of getting to be able to investigate, explore, and learn about what is really a truly deeply complex and fascinating part of the United States were some of the elements that really grabbed me from the very early pages of reading the book.
Well, from seeing the film, I was expecting you to be from the South, actually. Philip, and of course we don't want to give too many spoilers away because we're having this conversation obviously before the film, but it is a very complex character that you have, and it takes really a special talent to be able to kind of walk that fine line between being likable and otherwise, let's put it that way. What were the challenges for you in terms of this film?
I mean, what I connected to with the script is, so much is in the subtext between the characters, and people often don't say how they feel, verbally, but they still are going through a lot of conflicting feelings, and I guess I don't know. I mean, it was I'm not from around there. I grew up in New Jersey, but just the emotional core to Cole and like his conflict and how he deals with his relationships, family-wise and friend-wise and romantically, I really connected to. And I don't know, it was just, working with Braden, I feel like we really try to dive into the moment between the characters and, and just a sense of place. Like you mentioned before, talking about the air and the place and stuff. And I feel like one of the other main characters in the film is the sense of place and just, just diving into that whole thing.
Yeah, it's great you mentioned that, because a character is not always a human being. And there are so many other characters in this film that are important. But the working relationship between you, because having that subtlety in the film is work. It is the decisions, it's talent, it's experience, it's communication. And it's interesting because you look at the people there in this town and you get the feeling that they really do hold a lot in. Now, we probably don't have time to go into all that explanation, but tell me a little bit about your working relationship.
I could start off, Phil, maybe. I mean, one of the other breathtaking things I think about Carter's book and Elizabeth's script, her adaptation, Elizabeth Palmore's adaptation, was the way in which the three of us, Carter, Elizabeth, myself, and ultimately the actors, I think were hyper focused on the idea that all of these characters, nobody was all good or all bad, but they were just sort of trying to find their way through this world and this story. And it's why it was so critical to have actors who are as talented as Phil and the other cast that we had to be able to bring them to life, who could really play in the shades, like play in the spaces between good and bad, between different emotions, between, so very often you sort of lock in on something that's just one thing. And I think one of the most exciting things for me and working with Phil and the entire cast was the degree to which they were up for exploring that territory, that kind of space in between was sort of kind of, it's both part of that world, but it was very critical to those characters in this story. Like, it's literally where it takes place. I think rural Appalachia, these places that are kind of in between within our own country, is one layer of that. And then everybody involved in the film, all the characters, all the actors had to be able to be comfortable with a kind of undefined spot to inhabit. And Phil, I give all the credit to Phil and these guys, because they just really came with and pulled it off.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked so much about what interests me, is the grayness and where we all live, or you have any sort of scene that you approach and there's there's A and B, but to get from A to B, it can look like anything. And I feel like Braden and I think we really connect on trying to find that moment and what it looks like, and not necessarily kind of understanding where the thing is going, but also just leave things up to complete surprise, or just, what can spark some real life between the two characters. And I don't know, especially what interests me also with Cole is the idea of which I kind of connected to, is you don't fully really know who you are until you leave where you come from. And without that perspective, I think that often there's such nuance in the feelings that Cole has towards every person that's coming in and out of his life. So there's so many levels that I feel like every scene can have, and I think he's unsure of his feelings a lot of the time. So I feel like it was really exciting to kind of live in that grayness and that unknown, and just kind of scene by scene see where that took us.
Yeah, and I think for the audience, you feel the same way, because you don't know where it's going, and it's almost like you could feel that decision. It's like, oh no, don't do that, and it really works beautifully. And the whole film, the way it's shot and the music, and all these pieces come together in such a holistic way. I must congratulate you on that. The rest of the cast is phenomenal too, and I think there's, again, that kind of feeling as you're going along with the journey with them. And so many of the cast members, like yourself, Philip, have come off, some really, great projects. Paul Schrader's film, in your instance, was an amazing critical success, and other characters, Everett from Ozark, and just on and on and on. Was it a tedious job to assemble such an amazing cast for you, Braden, or did it come really naturally?
It was a thrilling job. There's nothing better than seeing a cast like that come together. It was complicated, and it was very tricky, for the producers in terms of scheduling, trying to literally balance bringing people in and out and how we can plug them into the schedule. I mean, it's a deceptively huge cast for a film of this size, and logistically it was hard in some respects, but actually finding everyone and putting them together is one of the best parts of the process. Allison Estrin, the casting director I collaborated with on this film, gets a huge amount of credit. She became, a really trusted, deep collaborator who completely transcended the typical casting director relationship in terms of oh, have you heard about this person, or look at this or that, but really went deep with me kind of into the story and what we were trying to do. And there was a certain thesis almost behind the casting. Like, we knew we wanted a very high caliber of actor, but it was also integral that they were able to weave themselves into this landscape that we keep talking about, that we absolutely as a character itself. And so you've got all the normal questions of like, oh, do these puzzle pieces fit together in the tapestry of this ensemble? Plus, can they inhabit this landscape? And, you know, there's nothing, I love that process of, you know, I could look at and talk to actors forever. And I mean, I love it. And there's nothing more thrilling than that moment where you know you have the right one. I mean, I think, Phil, you've heard this story, but I'll tell a truncated version of it. You know, I remember when we sat together and Phil did some readings for me, and I remember about 10 seconds into his first reading, I was like, all right, this is like, this is the guy. Like, he was so good that I was almost angry, like, at Allison, because she'd been talking to me about him forever. And, you know, I'd been considering him very strongly. And then she sort of like, I like to meet with people and talk with them. And I'm not always the best in auditions. I find them they can be difficult to assess sometimes. Mm-hmm. And, you know, a lot of what I do in the casting process is trying to figure out who's ready to go on this journey that Phil just described with me of discovery. You know, who can I trust in the trenches to like turn over all the rocks together is a big part of the casting process for me. But when Allison was like, you got to see him, you got to see him, you got to see him, we were done after like take one. And there, you know, it's like, okay.
We just kept going and going.
I know, because it was so fun.
But, you know, what's funny is I feel like we met for a general kind of regular meeting before we did the thing. And those things are so weird for actors because it's like, you're not, you know, me going into you know, the coffee shop is not who Cole is or something. Right. So it's an interesting thing. You know, we met and I think that like, we definitely realized that we got along work-wise and how we approach, you know, the work and the art of it, and the journey of it. But I think that like, it wasn't until I got to like go in and just show you kind of my take on what I was doing that I kind of like clicked in, like maybe this was the thing.
A lot of times on the director side, like, you know, the actor's work ahead of time, you know, like I'd seen your stuff, a lot of the actors on a certain level, it's like, you know, the actor can do it. And so the question becomes like, technically, but the question becomes like, is that work journey going to be there? So it's funny that we have these two different sides of the coin. Maybe you're now talking me into like, okay, I'll do both from now on. I'll do
Well, it's also interesting, and I think it was some things that I read, but first of all, it's just so difficult. And the filmmaker and the actors have to devote so much to making this movie. For the director, it's years. For the actors, I don't know how long you spent there, but it's a huge commitment. And so one, I could, and I love your both your features, and I know you made documentaries and other work, Braden. I love the fact that your films are complex and they have something meaningful to say. They don't come out and say it, that you make people feel this. It's intrinsic to the film. And I always wonder why anyone make a film that wouldn't have those elements in it. But I also understand there's a personal element, that a personal maybe need or hope that you have, that you want to come out of this film for you and for your cast and your crew. And what was it that you wanted to see? Or maybe you don't know, you just hope that there's something special that comes out of it that, relates to the amount of time you're away from your family and everything that you put into this film for your crew and your cast. Can you kind of talk to that a little bit?
Well, I guess the way I would answer that is like, you're right in that, like, for myself, the producers, Elizabeth Palmore, Carter Sickels, who wrote the book, the actors, everybody, collectively, we put a lot of our lives into these projects. That was sort of evident to me from a pretty early age in the early films. With like, you know, we do spend years on these things. We spend a lot of time away from our families. We spend a lot of time on location, you know, compared to other jobs and things. There are other jobs that require greater sacrifice, but it's not easy stuff. And I think I've always tried to operate from the standpoint that like both the project and the process, especially itself, have to carry some kind of intrinsic value, because at the end of the day, it's like all we have, you know, is what are we doing day to day in Harlan, Kentucky? You know, what are we doing with our actions as human beings, you know, even in bringing this thing into the world and the resources and the money that we spend and that kind of thing. And so I do kind of try to operate from a standpoint of both trying to find, you know, I love the idea of going out and bringing back images that are sort of haven't really been seen before, and the idea of the film as a kind of expedition, like there haven't been that many feature films shot exactly where we shot, for instance. And it was incredibly important to me to try to shoot it where we did for that very reason. You know, one of the things I think is that cinema is so good at is kind of bringing us out into the world through that screen. And it's why the idea often of like, well, let's go just shoot outside of Atlanta because it's easier to, you know, closer to an airport and closer to a hub, and we can kind of make it look like, you know, rural Kentucky, is a very narrative centric approach to filmmaking. It's like someone who's thinking, oh, this is only all about the story would approach it that way. And that's not really where I'm coming from. There's so much more to the process and the end product than just the story that you're telling. It's a huge element, but you also need an experiential element. You need a human element that these actors brought, and you need to, in our case, be sort of very honestly collaborating with the community in which you're shooting and involving them in sort of telling their own story. And it sort of goes back to the quote you read at the beginning of our conversation from Robert Geit. You know, the way in which we tried to approach the region within which we were shooting, which is a great deal of respect and listening, to be honest. You know, it's their story as much as ours. And that it goes back to why I wanted to tell this story. It was something I hadn't seen before. It was a place I hadn't experienced before. It was somewhere I hadn't seen represented, especially in this way on screen. And so that's kind of, you know, a slightly long-winded answer to sort of why I do the things I do and why I do them the way I do them.
Philip, any thing you could say? Were there any changes that you came away from, or perspectives that were changed from this work that you did on the Evening Hour?
Yeah, I mean, like Braden was saying, you know, I don't think you could have fully told this story if you didn't shoot it in the place that, you know, that it takes place. And I feel like often the people from that region are misrepresented, or you know, it's portrayed in like a cliche way, or a you know, a very like narrow-minded way. And you know, it's a beautiful place. The people there are beautiful, and I think that like I don't know, it was really important to just kind of show in you know, an underrepresented area and people in with humanity. And I don't know, I mean, even when I showed up there, Braden had put so much time and effort into the community and getting to know people, and just kind of like it was beautiful. It didn't feel like we were just kind of like going in there, shooting a movie and like running out. It's just, you know, even it was super meaningful to me, you know, at Sundance when Robert and a bunch of the other people there came out and got to experience the film with us. And it felt like we really had their approval and their support, and we supported them. And I don't know, it was just a beautiful thing. Every job you do, it leaves you with an experience and a perspective. And this one, you know, it's beautiful. I feel like it's kind of like my work and my life post the time we spent in Kentucky and pre-Kentucky. It's just, it's I don't know, it's really, it was a beautiful experience.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. Again, and most of all, thank you for bringing this extraordinary film here. We wish we had you in person here, but there's always next year. But in the meantime, everybody will have the wonderful experience of seeing the film. Thank you. Again, the Evening Hour.